Okay, so after a long week of delay, I am back to finish up my lectures on Hamlet and also pose the quiz question that I would like you to answer. Um, I did say when I began talking about the play that, or lecturing about the play, that what I want to do is talk about spaces and how spaces um, have value or are made to bear the weight of um, Hamlet's evaluation of the world, right? Of characters, of people, but also of life itself. So what I would like to do is wrap up that conversation about the way space is evaluated and valued by Hamlet, and then go into thinking about um, time, right? To be or not to be very often is connected with, say, the temporal experience. And what I really want us to do is think about spatiality, right? The gap, I would argue, is the gap of spaces that are left either unattended or in a void in our discussions of the play. So enough of that rambling. I shall continue with my lecture. So I ended, or the last lecture ended rather abruptly because I was running up on the 15-minute mark. With the last lecture, I was talking about how Hamlet is thinking about, he's accusing his mother, right, of all sorts of things which he hasn't yet articulated directly to her when she keeps asking repeatedly in her chambers what exactly is the deed that is so scandalous, that is so horrible, that Hamlet is, he's thinking murder of Polonius is nothing, it's pittance as compared to the horrible deed that has been committed, that his mother has in some ways either committed or orchestrated or certainly participated in, right? So indirectness eventually leads to directness, and he says to his mother, look here upon this picture, right? I mean, he says to his mother, compare these two men, right, who were, and one of whom is your partner, your spouse, and he does the whole, this one is a god, this one is a satyr, right, this one is a devil kind of thing. A compare and contrast, right? I mean, it's almost like an English 101 essay or a book report in which the foils are, the student writer is asked to talk about the foils in a novel or some crap like that. For the record, I absolutely hate the whole foil kind of character analysis. I just think it's, we insist on a polarization which need not necessarily be the best way in which to think about character, right? So if you're going into education, please think of that. Is it necessary for us to naturalize the opposition of characters in order to understand their difference? I don't think so. And I think one of the biggest problems we come up with is we find students or people more generally incapable of thinking about difference if it is beyond the scope of opposition and polarization, right? So maybe literary critics and teachers of literature need to reconsider the ways in which they teach. character and differentiation among characters. Anyway, Hamlet, of course, is like that simple-minded teacher or even student. In that he is asking his mother, forcing her even to compare two contrasts, right, between her two husbands. So he says, here is your husband, this guy with Jupiter-like curls and stuff, used to be your dude, where every god did seem to set his seal to give the world assurance of a man, right, the certainty. This was your husband. Look you now what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? Huh? Have you eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday in the blood is tame. It's humble and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this? Sense sure you have, else could you not have motion, but sure that sense is apoplexed, for madness would not err, nor sense to ecstasy was ne'er so thralled, but it reserved some quantity of choice to serve in such a difference. What devil was't that thus hath cozened you at Hoodman blind? Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling sense, all. Now this particular set of lines, right, where the senses are incomplete, where the incomprehensive nature of our senses, individual senses, is drawn out, that should remind you of Bottom's speech, right, where he's talking in Bottom's dream of how the senses are, by definition, incomplete, right? And so we need some sort of external an external medium, right? The medium of art, to kind of put together harmoniously what the senses simply are incapable of doing. It should remind you of that. And yet, with Hamlet, his belief or his assumption is that senses do work well together, only in his mother's case, they are not, right? Her judgment has failed, her senses, though around, are apoplexed, and he's ashamed of her, but also for her, because she herself is incapable of judgment, right? Good and sound judgment, which would otherwise enable her to recognize her own folly, right? So because she is not capable of recognizing it, she has poor judgment. He is feeling a sense of shame and horror and all that for her. But at the end of the day, what he is doing is trying to put her in her place, right? Reorient and resituate her as his mother, but also as the widow to a proper man, right? He wants to kind of he wants to distance her from the present status that she occupies, which is the space beside Claudius, right, as queen to Claudius, in her her role, right? He wants to distance her from her role as Claudius's spouse and partner, and I think that is very much the intention of Hamlet, to reorient characters, right? To reposition them and give them a sense of place that they might desire not to have, right? The space that they don't want to inhabit is where he wants to see them once again. And all of his speeches to the female characters specifically are designed to locate or relocate them. Nunnery, away from a marriage bed, which is what is going to happen soon, right? He's going to say, go not to go not to Claudius's bed, right? Do not sleep with him. This sense that he has to kind of curtail these female movements, because if he is not there as a watchman to their movement, they decide to go willy-nilly wherever they want, right? And clearly they are lacking in sound judgment, the ability to know good place from bad place, their place from not their place. So he has to kind of re-familiarize them, or at least familiarize them for the first time. He goes on and on about the shame and about how she is simply not acting like she should for a woman in her age, in her stage of life, and so on, to which finally the queen says, do not speak anymore, right? Speak no more. Thou turnst my eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will leave their tinct, right? And she's thinking of her soul's location, and she's thinking about the tainted and spotted nature of her soul, right? Again, the location of her soul is what is rendered visible to her, and what she sees is not, it's not entirely black or dark, right? I mean, if we are thinking in these color logics, right, she's not saying her soul is black, she's saying it's spotted, right? So there is a sense of texture that she recognizes, which she doesn't feel comfortable with, but he takes that to the other level of talking about the location of her bed, right? And he starts saying, nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty. And she's trying to shut him up again. She says, do not speak, right? These words like daggers enter my ears, no more, sweet Hamlet. And then finally, after all this while, in response to what deed, he says, a murderer and a villain, a slave that is not 20th part the teeth of your precedent lord, a vice of kings, a cutpurse of the empire and the rule, that from a shelf the precious diadem stole and put it in his pocket. No more, the ghost enters, right? So it has taken all but 100 lines for Hamlet to address her direct question, what deed, right? And I would argue the indirect nature of this answer, the indirectness is testament to the fact that he is more invested in I'm going to use the word again, repositioning his mother, as the widow of his father, as a sorry woman, repositioning her then. Yeah, his indirectness has much more to do with his investment in repositioning her in relation to this space that she occupies in his head, than providing her with his perceptions, right, with his sense of truth.